MJ to marry me.
A man has to put his wife before himself. Can you do that, Peter?
Yeah, I think I can.
Welcome to the Marvel Cinematic University. I'm your professor, Mario Rivera, and joining me is the marvelous doctoral student, Slycone MC, who has a bachelor's in the MCU, a master's in the multiverse, and is going for their dissertation in Marvel Studies. Sly, how are you doing today?
I am doing so very well. I can't say I'm excited to be here
Oh,
to
no.
talk about this movie.
Oh, no.
But I'm here to talk about the one and only Spider-Man 3.
That's right. That's right. We're here gathered to finally talk about Spider-Man 3. We're closing yet another book in our wonderful story. Of course, Spider-Man 3 starring hold on. Let me go through the whole thing. I'm sorry. I'm out of it. We've watched, of course, if you've been watching and following the show, we've done a couple extra credits. We haven't done a main show, so just hear me out, all right? I don't know why. I'm just going to keep talking.
It's been a minute. We're a little rusty.
A little bit rusty. But of course, yes, we're of course talking about Spider-Man 3, which came out in 2007, and we're going to go ahead and jump into our first major class, history class. It was, of course, directed by Sam Raimi, written by Sam Raimi, Ivan Raimi, and Alvin Sargent, who also wrote Spider-Man 2. The studio, of course, is still Sony Pictures, and it stars Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst, Topher Grace joining the cast, Thomas Hayden Church, and, of course, the return of James Franco, which, yes, we're very excited to talk about James Franco in this movie specifically. And of course has some other characters like J.K. Simmons is also in here, Ted Raimi, Rosemary Harris, of course, coming back as May Parker. Bryce Dallas Howard also joins the cast very briefly as Gwen Stacy, and a few others that are in this as well. And yeah, here we go. We're here to talk about Spider-Man 3, known to be supposedly the weakest entry in the sort of Sam Raimi verse of Spider-Man, so we'll definitely talk about that once we get to our discussion. But before we can do that, where can you stream this? You said you saw it on TBS, right?
I think so. It was one of those TV channel add-ons.
Yeah,
one of them.
I think I watched it when it was on Peacock. So I ended up watching this movie back in my rewatch leading up to the last Spider-Man movie. So it's still relevant in my mind, where I thought about the movie in the same way that I'm thinking about all these movies, where I'm trying to keep a sort of like, what does Mario feel in 2022, just to keep that current mindset. And I'm going to judge it by that. So if you can find it, it's most likely going to be on TBS, which is one of those streaming things you can add to Hulu, or I think you said you watched it on YouTube TV. So, or if you have cable, if you're still doing that, some people are. And of course, where would we be without you reading, of course, the plot to this movie?
This is a chunky plot.
I'll
say that up front. So, Peter Parker has finally managed to piece together the once broken parts of his life, maintaining a balance between his relationship with Mary Jane and his responsibility as Spider-Man. But more challenges arise for our young hero. Peter's old friend Harry Osborn has set out for revenge against Peter, taking up the mantle of his late father's persona as the new Goblin. And Peter must also capture Uncle Ben's real killer, Flint Marko, who has been transformed into his toughest foe yet, Sandman. All hope seems lost when suddenly Peter's suit turns jet black and greatly amplifies his powers. But it also begins to greatly amplify the much darker qualities of Peter's personality that he begins to lose himself to. Peter has to reach deep inside himself to free the compassionate hero that he used to be if he is ever to conquer the darkness within and face not only his greatest enemies, but also himself. Thank you, Dark Spidey on IMDb, for that very dramatic plot. And I gotta say, this is a thick movie, so that plot is not all encompassing. And you think that's a lot to shove in one movie? Yeah, it is. There's also so much more.
Yes, yes. Yeah, shout out to Dark Spidey. Shout out to you for reading that and of course playing the extra layer of darkness that apparently is within this movie. But yeah, of course the movie has comic book characters. Of course, Spider-Man is still in this, but it's now encompassing Venom and Sandman, as well as New Goblin is the best way I'll describe him. Green Goblin has sort of been a moniker passed around a few times.
Love of my life, Gwen Stacy.
Gwen Stacy, yes. Which,
Very briefly.
man, she deserves better. Thank God we'll get a series.
They're so much better.
Thank God we have a series coming up where that character is at least a functioning character. But now that we've gone through all the history of the setting up this movie, let's go ahead and start talking about it in our Stanley seminar, where we're going to go ahead. I'm going to have Sly first. Tell me what you think of Spider-Man 3.
Okay, so I was sitting here watching this movie, right? And I was in it. I was pretty solidly following along, right? I was like, I don't get why people are constantly shitting on this movie, right? And I was like, I've been watching this movie for an hour and nothing's happened. And I still have an hour and a half left. Huh. And then it just kept going and going and going. This movie is so long. It feels long, right? Like, if you're like 2 hours, 20 minutes, you can have a movie that time goes by in a blink of an eye. But this movie is not that. It drags, and the pacing is so off, and it just like I feel like there was so much that needed to be trimmed, and if you cut this movie down to the key points, I think it could be really great. I think there's a lot of really awesome things here, and I see what they're going for. They just needed a couple more passes through on that script. It was just too much.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those movies where it just has so much that it's juggling that it's trying to accomplish. But overall, because it's overburdened by all these themes and things that are going on, it just doesn't have a focus point for long periods of stretches of time. And so therefore, you're just waiting for things to sort of happen, right? Like, and then they sideline stories in the beginning for no reason. Like, we think that coming off of, say, Spider-Man 2, for instance, where it was setting up the fact that James Franco now learns that his father was the Goblin, we assume that's setting up some sort of conflict with Peter or something going on with that. And this immediately goes right into it. He's immediately injecting himself with some sort of chemical, which we assume is the stuff that made his father crazy. And then he goes on a warpath for 10 minutes of the movie, and then he's sidelined for a huge chunk of it. So that way we can get sort of the setup for, I believe, the Flint Marko character. And then suddenly, it's back. now that's a big threat. And then we get the Dark Spider-Man stuff, and then we do this, and now we got Venom. Like, there's just so many different parts. It felt like a mini series in a weird way. Like, but it's compacted in these 3 episodes. Where, like, if you gave time to each of these things and actually had them like have actual logical conclusions, then I felt like this would have been more cohesive. I will say
Could have been 3 movies.
it absolutely could have been 3 movies, which is pretty great. And hey, this movie, there was a very popular series in the time. They could have easily done it, but yeah, they decided that no, we're gonna go ahead and rush through the thing that we've been setting up the entire time, which was the relationship between James Franco and Toby getting to this point, but then filling in with even more shit that felt unnecessary, like the finding the real killer of Ben Parker. So yeah, I just think that this movie is just overstuffed. Do I think is as bad as I did when I first saw it? I remember I have another friend named Mario. The first thing before this movie came out, he says like, "Oh, it's terrible." And he was a huge Spider-Man fan. And I think that's permeated my thinking of it ever since. And I know I didn't like it still. And when I think of Spider-Man, these series of the movies, I always think of 2 as the first, as the greatest one. The great thing about this show, though, is allowing me to revisit it at a different age and care less about some of the things that go on and like the expectations of like, oh, I'm going to go see Venom and I'm going to see this and that. I've now seen Venom 3 times and I don't care anymore, so I get to at least watch like, okay, what were they trying to accomplish in this? And while I do think that, like I said, it's overwrought and too much, I don't think it's as terrible as everyone makes it out to be. I do think it is a watchable movie. I do think it is even an interesting closure of 3 movies. But at the same time, I still don't think it's the best of the series by far. I think we already said that. I think number 1 is still my favorite. Overall, I just think it's just a better film.
For sure.
Yeah.
And like I don't hate this movie, right? Because there's so much potential there. It just wasn't an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Because the whole time watching this, I was like, ooh, I wish they did this better, or I wish I did this better. And like, so I feel like I have love for this movie. It's just not a solid piece. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just where I'm at right now.
No, for sure. And I actually do want to break down a few things and ask you about them specifically. Like, throughout the series, we've had, to me, the main 3. The main 3 have always been Peter Parker, Mary Jane Watson, and of course, Harry Osborn. With this version of this next chapter in the story, where do you think that the characters are in terms of their relationship? Well, like, how did you feel that they were either continuing and / resolved in a lot of ways?
I was really worried that this movie was going to make me not like Harry. Like, I thought this movie was going to ruin Harry for me.
Sure.
And I was really scared about that. Like, after the first, the first chunk of this movie story, I was like, oh no, I really hope they don't ruin Harry for me. Because I love Harry Osborn. Like, and yes, that is heavily influenced by his storyline in the Spider-Man PS4
Sure,
game,
sure.
right? Like, that heavily influences my love for this character.
Yes.
But I was so worried about that. And then, they do the amnesia thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, we're cool. You're not gonna, like, ruin my feelings about this character. And then it just, like, it felt like he was the middle chunk, he was just there to destroy, Peter and MJ's relationship, which they do on their own. Like, we've
Yes.
already seen them.
Yeah.
They're always kind of tumultuous, right? We didn't need Harry to be involved in that. So that I wasn't a huge fan of that, but I did love the, like, coming back moment where they teamed up, they resolved their whatever. So I really liked his arc minus that weird MJ moment, right?
Sure. Oh yeah, I know what
For
you're talking
MJ, I just want them to let her be a well-developed character that has a personality outside of being in a relationship.
about. Yeah.
And, like, I think they did, like, a really interesting thing with, like, her getting a show and then, getting cut and having this conflict, and that could have been really interesting, but the only reason they told that story was to tell the audience that Peter's not paying enough attention to her,
Yeah.
and so that really cheapened that entire, story for her. And I get that this is just, a long-standing history of people not knowing how to write decent female characters, but I think she definitely suffers because of that.
For sure.
As for Peter, and, like, everybody calls this emo Peter, which is so valid, because don't get me started on the
I
hair.
don't
The
have hair
hair is
right now, but yeah.
absolutely ridiculous. But, that could be a really the story they tried to tell is really interesting. Where you have this, like, pure of heart hero who had this, lapse in judgment, gets influenced by this outside force, and has to overcome that, right? But instead we get the weird strutting down the street montage, which I have a funny story about this scene.
Yes.
I was watching this scene, he's doing the strut, he goes into the store, he comes out with the suit. I was, kind of checking out a little bit, I opened TikTok, and my good friend Bunky posted a TikTok that I opened. Like, it was the first thing I saw when I opened, and it was that exact scene, him walking out of the store in the suit to the new Harry Styles song
Jesus.
Cinema. And I was like, I am literally like, I'm watching this scene right now. I opened TikTok and this video is the first thing I see. I lost
funny.
it. That was just hilarious. But I just, there was too much there in Peter's story to make it a good, character arc.
Yes.
And if they trimmed it down, I could see what they were trying to go for, but it did not hit for me.
No, for sure. There are definitely some things that I enjoy in terms of the 3 arc of like their story carrying over. They've always had this sort of like Jacob Edward Bella thing going on before that was ever a thing. And I like that this played with that still, with the relationship between, because I mean, Mary Jane aside, I mean, we all know the issues there. I'm not going to focus too heavy on it, other than she's again the plot at the end of the movie for them to come together. It is what it is. But the fact that she's always had a relationship with somebody, if it was Flash Thompson, Harry Osborn, Peter Parker, and then there's this fun thing of, I don't think it's fun. It's really fucked up. But them, where Harry Osborn trying to break them up in a weird way and like saying like he got a girl. It's so stupid and juvenile. But for some reason, I enjoy the stupid movie only because I know of the previous history of the 2 movies. I think that's the only reason why I find funny quality or enjoyable qualities of it. But yeah, it is dumb, and I can't believe that's in that superhero movie.
I stand by my stance that love triangles are much better when they're real love triangles and everybody's bi, so it could go
Fair.
Any other way. And I think Harry trying to break up Peter by trying to get with Peter would have been so much more interesting than him trying to get with MJ.
In a lot of ways, it's like he just wants Peter to himself. If you think of it that way, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for sure, I totally could see that. But yeah, definitely. I love James Franco. I'm gonna talk about James Franco for a second. Whatever human being person doesn't, I don't care. I love this Harry Osborn because of how cheesy and weird he gets, and him just like eating that pie, just straight devouring it. It's good pie. Oh, love it.
Good for him. I will say though, that first the first fight with Harry and Peter, I did have to take a Dramamine for.
Yeah.
Which led into the Sandman origin story moment, which had a bunch of flashing lights, which I also couldn't watch. So the first chunk of this movie just was not visually accessible at all.
Definitely. It is also like the most interesting looking one, only because it's weird. I just don't, it visually doesn't feel like a Spider-Man movie for some reason, mostly because Spider-Man's not in costume. He's just in a suit, and it's just bizarre and weird. Yeah, no, it felt like more of like a Batman movie than it did Spider-Man for some reason, which to me didn't fit. But moving on from the main 3 characters, I did want to bring up now our new villains. Of course, we have Topher Grace and Flint Marko, played by Thomas Hayden Church. Let me start with Hayden Church first, because I want to. Topher Grace to me is like a whole separate argument. In terms of his involvement of the story, which he's supposedly the actual killer of Ben Parker, what did you think of that inclusion of that part of the story added to what we already know? Like,
it was interesting. I think it was there to set up the whole Peter struggling with that part of his history, like him taking a life and being responsible for that, and it not being who he thought it was. I thought that was really compelling idea and to have such a sympathetic villain, right? He's doing everything he can to save his daughter. The motivations I understood. He fell to the sidelines so much.
he did,
right?
yeah.
And
When he should have been the focus.
Yeah, I think you could have had either Sandman or Venom and cut down this movie significantly and made it a lot stronger. But because we had such a split focus here,
Yeah.
and Venom's obviously the more compelling story here with the interaction of, the symbiote Sue and Eddie Brock and all of those dynamics, that's going to be where your story is drawn to. And so Sandman really fell to the wayside. I think he's interesting. I think he's compelling.
Yeah.
We can talk about him coming back if we want to. Um,
Hmm.
but overall, I really enjoyed him. I do have in my notes though, uh, in the like train tunnel sewer thing
Yes.
where he turned to mud, I was like Sandman, more like Mudman.
Dork.
And that made me happy, so I had to share that with you.
No, that's good.
But yeah, I like him. I just felt like he was overshadowed by Venom the whole time.
Yeah, I think having them again, following through the story with Harry Osborn, which I think is something that they could have told by the end of this movie. Them overstuffing it with either yet another sympathetic villain that is misunderstood and sort of like going through the motions, which, it completes the themes of the last two movies. So I definitely do think that's the way that they probably should have gone. I do find it fascinating with the Eddie Brock version because once we get to the end of when he becomes full Venom at one point, he's like pure evil. And we haven't seen that really in this series so far. Everyone's sort of been a victim of their circumstance, or in terms of like being led to a downfall. This was like, no, I like doing this. This is bad and I enjoy it. And so I think that is also another interesting route they could have gone to. But at the same time, when you combined it all together, it just makes sort of a mess. And it's just, I think, for overall experience. By the way, my cat is climbing all over the place and probably knock something off. Hopefully the microphone picked that up. But yeah, in terms of just having them be the additional antagonist to the story, it just overstuffs the movie. But
I
yeah.
will say I love a church scene. I
Yes.
love that Venom gave us a church scene. That was, so fun and interesting and different. Like you said, we've seen the same type of villain in
Yes.
every movie up to this. And to have somebody so out there, just, it really puts a fresh take on this movie. If he, I think if you cut it down, you could do New Goblin and one of the other two. But having three major antagonists
Yes.
in one movie is just too many.
Yeah, and if you're not handling it in a smart way, I think it can actually overload a movie. And one day we will probably see this again. Well, if you see No Way Home, there's stuff there. But in terms of like having multiple antagonists, because a huge thing with Spider-Man has always been like a Sinister Six. This is like the closest they got to at this point, which was 3, and we've already like, oh god, I don't want anymore. We have later have seen them handle it in actually a real fun way, and we'll talk about the movie eventually. I don't think we actually talked about it on the show, but in terms of Venom, I just think that I just didn't think Sam Raimi very much was interested in that character, and it was very much shoehorned into this. He's very much into the old 70s, 80s comics, right? Bringing back Sandman, Dr. Rock, and Green Goblin. But with Venom was like is that relatively new to the point when the movie came out, but Venom was sort of like one of those like 90s creations of just sort of this like ultimate like evil like thing. And I just don't think that vibed with him, even though I think the studio pushed him to do it, and that's why he's in the movie in the first place. And overall, I just think that it's just a complete detriment to the overarchs that we've already had for the last 2 movies.
And I haven't seen the later Venom appearances in film. We'll get there, right? Yeah. And so my real touchstone for Venom is, I think it's like Venomverse War Stories. It's a collection comic And there was one story written by Nadia Corafor, which is one of my favorite authors. She's also done a couple Marvel comics. She did the Shuri 2018 run. She did the Long Live the King,
Okay.
and one other story. Can't remember off the top of my head, but they're all very good. I adore her, right? And her story in the symbiote collection was really interesting and really compelling use of this, entity as a character. And so that was kind of my touchstone for this, and to see it here just kind of be shoehorned into this movie was a real disappointment for me.
Yeah, ultimately, it's just used as sort of like a provocateur of your energy, right? In terms of like Peter, it just keeps pushing out the worst parts of him, which is it's just so, I don't know, it's so goofy. Is the best way to describe it. And of course, the way they try to like underline some of the things that he's doing is, I guess they discover something in the 70s or something like that, and that's why he started just acting like this too cool for school kind of like person. I don't know. It's weird. They go places. Is there things about this movie that you actually find really enjoyable, and what are those things? For me, I'll go first. Specifically for me, I do think that the dynamic of the three is still my favorite, even if it's silly. Just because, especially the ending moments, with of course the death of James Franco's character, Harry Osborn, I'm touched by it only because I had three movies to experience with each other, and then this was a seeing someone go, and finally, that him being a good guy again was really cool, and that I think that is my favorite part of this movie.
I loved his arc. Yeah, Harry was definitely a highlight of this film. I thought there was so many other like interesting places that could have been a commentary, but weren't. One I really enjoyed seeing the potential for where it could have gone was the scene with Peter and MJ when MJ's talking about the first review
Yeah.
and reading it. And when we look at Peter, especially in this series, he's pretty heavily autistic coded, which is, a choice. I don't know if I have thoughts about that on that choice, but when you look at that scene, it could have been a really interesting commentary on the differences between how neurotypical people express empathy and how neurodivergent people express empathy, because that scene, it's tried to be played off as, oh, like Peter's just thinking about himself, he's being selfish or whatever, but it's actually an example of a pretty solid example of how neurodivergent communities tend to express empathy by pulling from a piece of your past where you had a similar experience and relating it to somebody's current experience, being like, oh, like I had something similar to me happen. I understand where you're coming from, why you're feeling like this, and then trying to offer support. And obviously that doesn't go over well with her,
No.
because that's not how she expresses or experiences empathy. And that could have been a really interesting commentary. Obviously it didn't. I don't think
No.
that would land for many people, but
True.
it could have been something cool they could have done with that moment. And there's so many of those pieces in the film, or there's so many pieces where you look at it and go, this could have been a really cool commentary, and they just didn't do anything with it.
Yeah, definitely. I think overall, movies that this ilk is not following these type of things or even exploring these sort of concepts, you're not finally getting to that until, I would say, more in the more MCU based things, right? We had just Moon Knight that talked about very specifically, multiple. I don't want to get, is it ID?
It's Moon Knight is usually diagnosed with DID,
DID, that's what I meant.
dissociative
Sorry.
identity disorder.
Yeah. So in terms of that, where we're exploring these things, but they're part of the commentary as well as part of the thing, as opposed to just sort of like these are the characters. So I do find that very nice. But overall, yeah, I do see that for sure. Yeah. Do you compare it to obviously the MCU counterparts to this? You said that you haven't seen the Venom thing, but mostly you've definitely seen some of these characters show up in the MCU. In terms of the journey of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man compared to MCU, where do you feel that this falls in line with like the way that they're telling their stories? I mean, overall, they're very different, but they're also very similar. Do you see a pattern or something about that?
I think it's really interesting when we look at No Way Home. There's
Yes.
a lot of commentary around how much screen time we see of each of the Spider-Men in the suit. And Toby, we only see him in the suit once in that movie, right?
Yeah.
And looking at the trilogy we have here and him in this movie, he's not wearing the suit very often. And I don't know if that is an actor choice or a character choice, but that was really interesting to me watching this movie. I'm like, wow, we see a lot of Peter and we don't see a lot of Spider-Man here. And that really carries over to his MCU appearance, which I thought was really interesting.
Yes. I do find that we're still in the era where I feel like studios are like, hey, the money's on the screen in terms of the person that is on screen as opposed to putting their face behind a mask. It's like, think of like if Tom Cruise, for instance, was Iron Man, it'd be very interesting to see how much they would have him have his face out. Mostly, but again, they get away with that in Iron Man because they have that Iron Man camera face thing where you can still see him. So they found ways to still get around. And there's still times in the last Spider-Man movie where they always are taking their mask off and they're always having conversations. So they still do that. I do say though that they're definitely more better about it in terms of being in the costume. But you're 100% right. This movie has major scenes where it's just Peter in normal clothes as opposed to the outfit. You get the scenes, right? You get the classic dark Spider-Man scene fighting Flint Marko, and you get, of course, the final ending scene, or him getting a key to the city, which I actually really thought was really funny. But obviously, mostly, like, we get an extended scene of him doing jazz. So it's like they definitely had their focus somewhere else.
The jazz club.
Let's talk about
I don't
that.
want to talk about
You don't want to talk about that? I kind of want to talk
No.
about it.
Okay, let's talk about it. It was a choice.
Yes.
The whole time I just felt bad for both Gwen and MJ
Yeah.
because he's just being really shitty to both of them.
Yes.
And I would have loved to see more of those two interact in a way that wasn't, we have a common partner who's just using both of us.
Yes.
And, but the jazz club was a choice.
Oh, yeah. Again, I don't know what the plan was, and I love Sam Raimi. I love him to death. I love Evil Dead. I love Doctor Strange in the Multiverse. There are some issues in that movie as well. I don't know. He put his full Duffy in here, and I don't know why. This is to me is weird.
Why did he make Toby dance so much? Is my real question.
That's
there
a
was
real
so
question.
much dancing from him in this movie,
I don't know.
and it wasn't enjoyable.
No, not at all. Those are still the aspects of the movie that I think a lot of people still make fun of that I think are very apparent and live in infamy for sure. Before we go off and move on to probably our next class, I do want to talk about some other returning characters. Let's talk about the Daily Bugle because I love the Daily Bugle. So let's talk about J.K. Simmons in this.
So
Not
good.
enough. Not enough, personally.
Truly, you can never have too much J. Jonah Jameson.
No.
Like, the limit does not exist. I love the blood pressure running bit.
Yes.
Every time he's on my screen, he brings me joy. Like, those were definitely all the scenes of the Daily Bugle were highlights of this movie.
Yes. Thank you, Sam Raimi, for somehow getting him to the final fight as well in terms of buying the camera from the little girl. Where's Parker? Yeah, no, I'm so happy. And so real quick then, for me, I lost my goddamn mind when it was Far From Home when I saw that J. Jonah Jameson was back. I mean, because I had that connection though. It does suck that I wish that you were able to experience that in some way. I mean, you saw J.K. Simmons as that
I
character.
mean, I loved I still loved seeing him
Yeah.
appear. Like, I loved Jordan Jameson. I enjoyed J.K. Simmons as that actor. It was still an exciting moment for me,
Yeah.
even though I hadn't seen every single appearance of him before.
No, for sure. And it being a more Alex E. Jonesy version of this character, it was also a fun thing to do. But yeah, just wanted to talk about J.K. Simmons and that wonderful, wonderful mustache. You will be missed in this.
We can add this movie to the Sebastian Stan universe.
Oh Lord, that's right. Oh, the Stan verse continues. Well, let's move on to from the Stan Lee seminar and on to drama class, where we of course reenact some of our favorite scenes. You prepared majority of these scenes, and so I'm very excited to go through this. So I'm gonna let you pick the roles. What would you like to do?
For the first one, I want to be Peter.
Okay, sounds good.
Stings, doesn't it?
I protected you in high school, and now I'm gonna kick your little ass.
Ooh. His little shoulder shake when he does the ooh. I lost it. I lost it.
I love it too. It's goofy and fun, and I just love whenever they have like antagonistic stuff in this movie. It's so much fun. Okay, real quick before we do that, can we just talk about the world's worst butler? I hated him.
Are you talking about Osborne's butler?
Yeah, that guy sucks.
I loved him.
Oh my god,
He was my favorite part.
He could have circumvented so much of this movie if he just said something earlier. When I was cleaning her father's glider, I noticed that the blood. I hated it. Next scene. Who do you want to be?
Him. Anyway, this next one I'll let you be Peter.
Okay. You're trash, Brock.
Excuse me?
Your picture's a fake.
Oh, Parker, you're such a Boy Scout. When are you going to give a guy a break?
You want forgiveness? Get religion.
What a beautiful foreshadowing moment with such a silly comment.
Such a silly comment. And if you also want to know how evil Eddie Brock is, what is the thing he asked God? He asked God to kill Peter Parker. It's so wild.
I loved that moment. It was such an interesting character moment. Gosh.
No.
I love a church scene, as well established.
So funny. There's a lot of church scenes in the movie Men 2022. Go check that out. Which I can't wait to tell you this. I'm going to tell you the spoilers after this podcast. I told everybody and they were like, what? Anyways, I put this one in here because it's my favorite line of the movie. It is of course Venom. I'm going to try and do a Topher McGrace impression. My spider sense is tingling, if you know what I'm talking about. I just love he had like nails and it's just the look of Venom in here is so wild because the costume is clearly just the dark suit, but like even more gross looking, and the weird tentacles that are on his face and the teeth are.
I was weirded out by how Eddie Brock's teeth changed.
Yes.
After the symbiote. That was a choice.
They didn't need to do that at all. It's not a thing that I've seen before for Eddie Brock. It's not something to do now. And now they're just like, you're going to give you vampire teeth. I'm like, okay, whatever you say. Would you like to go with this next one?
Oh, you're Harry, because I want to be the butler. Because this is
I think the
my
butler's
favorite
name is
character this entire.
I think his brother's name is Norman. Okay, here we go.
I don't remember.
All right. Osborne, yeah. Norman, I don't know. No, it can't be. It doesn't matter. Okay. We're having a guest. Can you get some food?
A guest?
Yeah, a guest.
A guest?
Will you just get some food?
Right away, sir.
Jesus. I don't know. I didn't know
It
this.
makes me so happy.
I didn't know this man was a horny butler. Jesus Christ. I did not know.
A guest?
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead. I'll let you close it out with this quote here from Stan Lee.
The wonderful Stanley, of course, gets chef's kiss line. I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
I did learn actually doing the trivia for this that apparently Nuff said is like a big thing he used to put in the comics all the time. So it's really cool that they actually were able to put that in the movie. So I think that is cool. Well, that closes out drama class. Moving on to music room, which of course superhero movies of this era are remembered for their original soundtracks. Does the music in this movie hold up or have any songs that are still bangers today? I don't have anything here because I don't remember a song in this movie, to be honest with you.
I have one.
Yeah. Other than the jazz. That's it.
So there was the jazz, and then when MJ and Harry were hanging out,
Oh my
the
god.
twist plays.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my god, they got the twist.
I forgot about
And
that.
so, like, standout songs include a jazz standard and a 50s songs. Like,
Yeah.
you know, real bangers.
Real bangers. Thanks again. Thank you so much, Sam Raimi, for being just you and putting this in the movie. Yeah, I totally forgot about that. Let's talk about that just for a second. The whole them making breakfast together scene, just like making an absolute mess. And then ending in a kiss.
Harry Osborn is obviously a rich kid and never had to make food in his life, and
Yes.
is now attempting to impress a girl. Was so very on brand.
Yes. And what were they making? Eggs or something? They were just, it was like sandwiches.
It was omelets.
It was omelets. That's what I thought. Yeah. They can't even do that. Can't even do that. For me though, honestly, this movie is somewhat of a disappointment in terms of a song, because this is sort of the whole reason for this category is the fact that Spider-Man 2 have, to me, iconic theme songs, and this one does not. Mm-hmm. Now, I looked at the original soundtrack just to see who was on it, and yeah, they had music of the time, just different tracks, but nothing that stood out even in the movie or as promotional for the movie personally, which I think is a sad thing that they close this thing out. Like I said, Hero might as well be the theme song of this goddamn podcast, as far as I'm concerned.
Right?
But of course, let's now transition to my favorite part of the show, quiz time. Who, of course, we're going to go ahead and quiz little Sly here. First question, though, even though I have it as number 2 here, is Stan Lee in this movie?
Yes, he is.
Yes, he is. And
very prominently in this movie.
Yeah, where is he in this movie?
He's the old dude on the street when Peter's looking up at all the news poster whatever thing.
I'm just happy that Stanley finally gets to have a speaking role in one of these movies, and B, talk to probably one of his greatest creations of all time. Which is a
right. Well, he had a couple lines in Hulk.
He does,
but not like an iconic quote.
No. He's talking to Lou Ferrigno, who of course was the Hulk on the TV show, which was cool. Which, by the way, I don't know if you know this. There's a great episode where the Hulk is on trial in the TV show, and in the stands is Stan Lee. So
love that.
That is it's cool to have them on screen together for that specifically. Watch our Hulk episode. That movie rules. It's still one of my favorites. Of course, yeah, Stan Lee is in the film. Next question. Sam Raimi wasn't happy with the way that this movie came together. It had a lot of studio influence, sadly. But vowed to do better with the fourth one. That sadly did not happen. Who was supposed to be the villains of Spider-Man 4? Now, villains or villain, because there was supposed to be something. Was it A, Rhino, B, Kraven the Hunter, C, Morbius, or D, the Vulture? Who do you think was going to supposedly be the fourth version, the first character to Tobey Maguire is supposed to fight?
I have no idea. Thinking like Rhino's like such a classic Spider-Man villain, right?
Yes, 100%.
And then we have I'm looking at Kraven the Hunter and Morbius. Those are two. Well, Morbius came out, but then there's a Kraven the Hunter project in the works.
That is shooting right
question
now.
mark?
That is shooting right now, actually, yeah. Starring Kick-Ass.
I think I have to say Rhino just because he's such a classic Spider-Man villain.
He is, in fact, a classic character, but he was actually not going to be in the next one. It was actually going to be the Vulture, which, of course, hey, they eventually follow up on that in of course, the Tom Holland movies with Michael Keaton playing the Vulture. I think it was originally supposed to be John Malkovich as the Vulture, as like a cranky old dude. There was another rumor that Black Cat was going to be in the movie as well. And I think at the time, the actress that most tied to it was supposed to be Anne Hathaway.
Huh.
Yeah.
Spider-Man does not need another underdeveloped woman for a first movie. But I can see why they were going for that.
No, for sure. And I think the other rumor was either she was going to be Catwoman or Vulture was going to have a daughter that was also a Vulture person. But all right. Yeah. And of course, it would continue the relationship with Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire. And real quick, before I go on to my last question here, actually, what did you think of sort of the semi-downer note of this movie? I mean, are they together? Are they not together at this movie? What is your sort of interpretation of that last scene? We kind of get an answer in No Way Home, but just by the end of this movie, like, what did you thought about the fact that it's not, to me, it's not so clear cut that they're together? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I would not buy that they were together at the end of this. I could see years down the line if we came back to it, maybe. But at the end of this, they feel pretty solidly separated.
Yeah, which is weird to say for like a final chapter, right, for these characters, supposedly. That's why I think the certain elements in No Way Home stand out so much, because these are answers we're seeking, and to get even little crumbs, I think is really great. I know that people are still asking for more, and I'm like, we got what we got, please. Like, we don't need to keep opening these boxes all the time. I think sometimes some boxes should be closed, and I think that movie was a good way to close both Andrew Garfield and also the story. But I digress. The last question I have for you, of course, is out of the 3 Spider-Man films under Sam Raimi, which one was the most successful at the box office?
My gut instinct is to say 2, because, 1 was the first, right? And then sequels always tend to do really well. And 1 was so successful that I'm sure 2 blew it out of the water. And it could have been this one, but I don't think it was. I feel like it was definitely 2, but I could be wrong.
Let's see here. All right, Spider-Man 1. It made $825 million. Okay, 825. I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this and change the 1 to a 2. Let's see here. Number 2 actually made 789. So it actually went down, oddly enough.
Wow.
Which is shocking.
Shocking.
But can you guess 3? 3 is actually 894. It just barely beats it out by, I think, 50 million. So yeah, Spider-Man 3 is the most popular of the 3 movies. It didn't crack $1 billion, but at the same time, yeah, that's pretty crazy, because when I look at No Way Home's numbers, No Way Home did 1.8 billion, which means that it was like, hey, there's Spider-Man 3, but then there's like a whole set of like different others over there. So pretty wide margin for sure.
I can't believe that 2 did so much less than 1.
Yeah, but
That's
more beloved,
surprising.
which is shocking. That is
Yeah.
shocking to me compared to these numbers. But yeah, Spider-Man 3 was actually the most popular one, and I think they were gonna be dead set on making a 4th one with Sam Raimi, but Sam Raimi stepped away because he was working on something else, I think, at the time as well. And then they
I
decided,
wonder
hey,
what else came out
let's
at
see.
the same time as 2.
Let's take a look. Spider-Man 2, 2004, right? Yeah,
Gosh, it's in my
2004
notes.
movie top grossing movies, top movies box office. Here we go. Number 1, Shrek 2. Number 2, Spider-Man 3. Spider-Man 2. Number 3, Passion of the Christ, which made bank. And number 4 here is Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
All right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
there you go. Shrek 2, number 1 movie of 2004. And that, I think, concludes our quiz time, which I believe you got, I think, 1 out of the 3. Hey,
I only got
doesn't
1
matter.
out of 3.
Doesn't matter, all right? Doesn't matter. I make up the rules, so the points don't matter. And that's Spider-Man 3. I mean, final thoughts. We're going to homeroom here. What are your final thoughts on Spider-Man 3? Do you recommend it to people? And is this worth watching?
I don't think so.
Really?
I think if you want to watch it, you'll get a lot out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I recommend it. There's just so much, and it's so long, and it's just not, enjoyable. Like it's a fine movie, but it wasn't a fun movie.
Sure.
Like there are much worse movies that we've watched for the show that I have recommended with my whole chest, right? Like I love a bad movie because bad movies could be really enjoyable.
Yes.
This was a fine movie that wasn't enjoyable. As much as it hurts me to say, I don't think I would recommend this movie.
Okay. I'm going to be on the other side of the spectrum. I'm going to say I recommend to see it only because I want to say it's not as bad as everyone says it is. However,
That's fair.
but it is boring. There are massive scenes that are just boring stuff in here and are dumb. But at the same time, I think that if you are watching 1 and you are definitely watching 2, you might as well finish the 3. You might as well see the full journey there. Not only just to have that extra little bump of energy when you watch No Way Home specifically. I think that everything leading up to that is just wonderful, in my opinion, even if a lot of it is trash. So definitely.
For sure. I know a lot of people say this is a bad movie. I don't think that at all.
Yeah.
It's a boring movie, but it's a fine movie.
Yeah,
Like
fine. Just baseline.
yeah. So like I wouldn't go around judging this movie and like, this is the worst, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that. But it's much better than Punisher. I'll say
Again,
that.
much better than Punisher. At the very least, I think that Spider-Man 1 and 2 are good, great movies. This one is just fine. Just baseline fine. So
Exactly.
all right. Well, again, we're going to go ahead and start closing up shop here. We're going to get to do some homework. I, of course, didn't write the homework here, but I believe it's we're doing Final Fantasy. Not Final Fantasy. We're doing we're doing the sequel to, if I'm not mistaken, Rise of the Silver Surfer, of course, Fantastic Four, which I'm excited. I've not seen this movie in years, and we may or may not have a guest. I will not confirm. We'll have to find out if this person who said they want to watch this movie will actually watch this movie. I will hold it to him. But until then, of course, we'll be watching Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, which, yeah, I love. You saw how I felt about the last one. I'm very excited to see how they continue on with this one.
I had fun with the first one. I very interested to see where they go. Very interested to see if we get any more moments that make me ship Victor and Reed.
Who knows?
I doubt it, but who knows? We'll see.
I don't know. Will we see Dr. Doom again? We'll find out. Let's find out. I'm really excited. But of course, that will be your homework for next week. Sly, where can people find you on the net?
You can find me yelling about 911 and 911 Lone Star on TikTok Live on Thursday nights. You can find me yelling about video games on the Point Progress podcast. And you can find me yelling about all of the MCU canon Marvel projects, especially the TV shows coming out on We'll Throw the After Party. We're gearing up for Miss Marvel in a couple weeks.
Yeah, we
Very
are.
exciting.
That's awesome. That's cool. Very excited to hear you all talk about that. Fantastic. Well, of course, you find me here over at Point in Progress. You can also find me at the Model Citizenship. I have another episode coming up very shortly. And then, of course, you're going to always find me here at the MC University. I have too much fun doing this and revisiting older movies with, of course, my wonderful co-host, Sly. So, yes, this has been fantastic. And until next time, class is dismissed.
We have some new information. This is your uncle's actual killer. We lost his trail 2 days ago.
This man killed my uncle, and he's still out there!
Everybody needs help sometimes, Peter. Even Spider-Man.
Revenge is like a poison that can take us over. And before you know it, can turn you into something ugly.
The suit. Where'd this come from? The power. Feels good. You lose yourself to it.
Whoa!
Spidey, love the new outfit.
Remember Ben Parker?
What does it matter to you anyway?
Everything!
Do you want to push me away?
Why would I want to push you away? I love you.
You knew this was coming, Pete.
I didn't kill your father!
What's happened to you? We've all done terrible things to each other, but we have to forgive each other, or everything we ever were will mean nothing.
I need your help. I have to stop it.
This could be the end of Spider-Man.